Daniel Carter slammed his resignation letter on the HR desk at 8:47 on a Monday morning, and every single person in that open office went completely silent. Not because he was angry, because he was smiling. 36 hours earlier, he had woken up in a stranger's bedroom with no memory of how he got there. 12 hours after that, the most powerful woman in the building had looked him dead in the eyes and said two words that flipped his entire world upside down. "Good morning, honey." What happened between that party and that resignation letter? That's the story. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You don't want to miss where this goes. Daniel Carter had exactly one rule for company parties: show up, smile, leave before 10. That was it. That was the entire rule. 3 steps. He had followed it every single year for the past 4 years, without incident, without drama, and without anything resembling a story worth telling. He would walk in, shake the right hands, eat whatever was on the buffet table that didn't look suspicious, drink exactly 1 beer, 1 never 2, and disappear before the music got loud and the junior employees started doing things they would regret photographing. It was a perfect system. He ruined it on a Thursday night in October. The Bennett Innovations annual celebration was held at the Meridian, a hotel event space on the 42nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. It was the kind of venue that made regular people feel important and made important people feel like they deserved it. Somebody had spent serious money on the lighting. Everything glowed amber and gold, like the inside of a whiskey glass. The kind of beautiful that made you forget just for a minute that you had a 7:30 alarm and a daughter who needed her lunch packed before school. Daniel noticed all of that in about 4 seconds, and then stopped noticing it, because noticing things like lighting and venue design was not something a man in his position had the luxury of doing. His position being the only single father on the operations floor, who also served as the unofficial emotional support system for 17 coworkers, 3 of whom had already texted him tonight, asking if he was coming. He was coming. He would smile. He would leave by 10. He checked his watch when he walked through the door. 7:52. He had exactly 2 hours and 8 minutes before this became somebody else's problem. Carter. Marcus Webb, his closest friend at the company, and the man personally responsible for talking Daniel into staying past 9 o'clock. At the previous 3 holiday parties, appeared at his left shoulder like a man who had been waiting. "You're doing the face," Marcus said. "I don't have a face." "You absolutely have a face. It's the face that says, I've already calculated my exit." "I'm here, aren't I?" "Your body is here." Marcus pressed a glass of something into Daniel's hand without asking. "Your spirit is already in the parking garage." Daniel looked at the glass. It was not beer. It was something darker, something with ice, something that probably had a name he would need to ask twice before understanding. "What is this?" "It's called having a good time. Try it." Daniel did not try it. He set the glass on the nearest table with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been declining things politely for years. "I need to be coherent. Emma's got a math test tomorrow and she always calls me the night before when she's nervous." Marcus stared at him for a moment, with the specific expression of a person watching someone choose a salad at a steakhouse. "She's 8, Marcus said. "She's anxious. She's 8 and anxious because her father taught her that relaxing is a form of failure." "That's not..." Daniel stopped. "That's not what I taught her." "What did you teach her?" "That preparation matters." "Same thing, buddy." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Drink something. Talk to someone. Emma will call, you will answer, you will both survive. The sun will rise tomorrow, I promise." Daniel picked up the glass again. He did not drink it, but he held it, which for Daniel Carter was basically the same as committing to the evening. The party filled in around him like water around a stone. He stood at the edge of the main floor and watched people he had worked beside for years transform into slightly louder, slightly softer, slightly more honest versions of themselves. Sarah from accounting was laughing at something with her head thrown back. The 2 guys from IT were arguing passionately about something in the corner. 3 people from marketing were already on the dance floor, technically dancing, possibly auditioning for something. And then across the room, standing at a tall table with a glass of sparkling water and the quiet, contained energy of someone who had learned a long time ago how to be in a room without needing to own it, Sophia Bennett. Daniel had seen her 100 times, maybe more. You didn't work at Bennett Innovations without seeing Sophia Bennett. She was the name on the building, the face in the quarterly town halls, the voice behind the all-staff emails that somehow managed to sound personal even when they went to 600 people. He had sat in her presentations. He had heard her speak about strategy and culture and the future of the company with the kind of clarity that made you believe she had already lived in that future and was just reporting back. He had never once stood 12 feet from her at a party and watched her try not to look like she was counting the minutes until she could leave. But that was exactly what she was doing. He recognized it because he was doing it too. He looked away. He was not the kind of man who stared at the CEO at company functions. He was the kind of man who stood near the food table, held drinks he didn't finish, and checked his phone every 11 minutes for a call that wasn't coming yet. "You're doing it again." Marcus materialized beside him again, a fresh drink in his own hand, eyes tracking the direction Daniel had just been looking. "I wasn't doing anything," Daniel said. "You were watching her. I was looking at the room. The specific part of the room that contains Sophia Bennett, yes." Marcus tilted his head. "You know, for a man who claims to have zero interest in anything that isn't spreadsheets or school pickup, you've looked in her direction 4 times in the last 10 minutes. I counted 2. There it is," he counted. Marcus grinned. "Go talk to her. She's the CEO. She's also a person, at a party, who appears to be having the exact same level of fun as you, which is to say, approximately none." Daniel looked across the room again. Sophia had shifted slightly, turning her sparkling water in slow circles on the table. Someone had approached her, a man from sales enthusiastic gesturing too broadly, and she was nodding with the precise, practiced attentiveness of someone who had learned to listen to things they didn't care about without showing it. "She looks busy," Daniel said. "She looks trapped," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. And you, Daniel Carter, are uniquely qualified to understand that difference." That was an unfair thing to say. It was also accurate, which made it worse. Daniel stayed where he was for approximately 4 more minutes. He didn't cross the room with a plan. He didn't rehearse anything. He walked over with his non-drink in his hand and stood near enough to the sales guy whose name was Trevor, because of course it was Trevor, to make it socially ambiguous whether he was joining the conversation or just happening to be nearby. Trevor glanced at him. "Carter Wright Operations." "That's right. We were just talking about the Q4 projections. I actually had a question for Ms. Bennett," Daniel said. "Operations question. Boring stuff. Sorry to interrupt." Trevor looked briefly annoyed, then looked at Sophia, then looked at the opportunity to escape a conversation he had started without any clear ending in mind, and took it. "Right, yeah. I'll catch you later, Sophia." Sophia watched him go, then she looked at Daniel. "You didn't have an operations question," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact stated plainly, like she appreciated not having to pretend. "No," Daniel admitted. "I didn't." She almost smiled. Almost. The corner of her mouth moved in a direction that wasn't quite neutral. "So what did you actually want?" He thought about it honestly. To not be standing alone near the food table. She looked at him for a moment. Then she actually laughed, short, real, not the kind of laugh that CEOs deploy at parties for diplomatic purposes. An actual laugh. "Me too," she said. He would think about that moment later. Not for romantic reasons, or at least not immediately for romantic reasons. He would think about it because of how strange it was. How a woman who ran a company, who had her name on the building, who had built something from nothing and kept it standing through everything the market had thrown at her in the last decade, how that woman was standing at her own company party alone, wishing she could leave just like him. He hadn't expected to find that. He hadn't expected a lot of things about that night. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The food. The music, which had shifted from something tasteful to something that suggested the DJ had personal opinions about the early 2000s. The view of the city through the windows, which Daniel had stopped appreciating approximately 3 minutes after arriving, and Sophia admitted she had never quite gotten used to even after 4 years in this building. "You'd think it would become ordinary," she said. "Most things do. Does it bother you when things become ordinary?" He considered the question. He was used to questions that had right answers. Operational questions, logistical questions. The kind of questions his daughter asked him about math and fairness, and why some people were unkind. This question didn't have a right answer, and he wasn't sure how to hold that. "I think," he said slowly, "that ordinary can be good. Ordinary means stable. It means predictable. It means you know what's coming next, and you can plan for it." Sophia tilted her head. "That sounds like a very careful way to live." "It works for me." "Does it?" He looked at her. There was something in the question that wasn't challenge, exactly, more like genuine curiosity. Like she actually wanted to know. Not to prove a point. Not to demonstrate something about herself. She was just asking. "I have a daughter," he said. 8 years old. Her name is Emma. Stable and predictable aren't just preferences. They're the whole job. Something shifted in Sophia's expression. Something that had been professionally neutral became something more specific. "Just you. Just me. 4 years now." She didn't say "I'm sorry." He had always appreciated people who understood that "I'm sorry" was sometimes the wrong response. She just nodded. "That takes a certain kind of courage. Or stubbornness. Hard to tell the difference from the inside." She smiled again. This time it reached her eyes. "I know that feeling." He should have left at 10. He knew it when Marcus appeared again at 9:53, with the specific expression of a man who had decided to become inconvenient on purpose. "Carter, some of us are doing the penalty game." "No. It's for charity, loosely defined." "Still no. There's a trivia component." Daniel looked at Marcus with the weariness of a man who had been friends with him long enough to know that "trivia component" was the exact kind of phrase Marcus deployed when he wanted to make something sound less dangerous than it was. "What kind of trivia?" "Company trivia. History, milestones, products, leadership." Marcus glanced at Sophia with the breezy casualness of someone who had absolutely not planned this exact moment. "Ms. Bennett, you should join. Seems unfair to test on company history without the founder present." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Is that a challenge?" "Purely an invitation." She looked at Daniel. "Are you playing?" "No," he said. "Yes, he is," said Marcus. The penalty game was, in its defense, genuinely entertaining. It involved company trivia, progressively more difficult questions, and a penalty round where wrong answers resulted in social forfeits. Nothing inappropriate. Marcus had designed it himself, and Marcus's chaos had always had a conscience attached to it. The forfeits included things like reenacting a famous company presentation, calling a former coworker, and saying something genuinely kind, or most dreaded, giving a 60-second speech about your most embarrassing professional moment. Daniel answered 7 questions correctly in a row, and then, on the 8th question, got the date of the company's Series B funding wrong by 3 months. 60-second speech, Marcus announced with entirely too much satisfaction. "I'm not doing a speech. Rules are rules. You made the rules. Which means I know what they say." Daniel looked around. Maybe a dozen people had gathered for the game. Some were laughing. Some were watching with the comfortable amusement of people who were glad the forfeit had landed on someone else. And Sophia Bennett was watching him with her arms crossed and that almost smile waiting. He took a breath. He stood up. And because Daniel Carter did everything either correctly or not at all, he gave the speech. He talked about his first week at the company. He talked about a logistical error he'd made that had caused 3 shipments to arrive at the wrong facilities on the same day. He talked about the frantic, terrible problem-solving chaos that had followed, and the moment he'd called his daughter Emma, 6 years old at the time, to tell her he was going to be late, and she had said with complete sincerity and absolute confidence, "You'll figure it out, Daddy. You always do." He paused on that, not for effect, just because it still did something to him even 2 years later. "She was right," he said. "I figured it out. We always do. Even when we're pretty sure we won't." He sat down. The room was quiet for a second. Then someone started clapping and it spread, and Marcus was doing the face he always did when something worked out better than expected, which was the face of a man pretending to be surprised by something he had engineered from the beginning. Daniel didn't look at Marcus. He looked at Sophia. She was not clapping. She was just watching him, with an expression he couldn't quite name, like she was recalculating something. He did not remember deciding to have a second drink. He remembered someone handing him something, and the conversation continuing, and the skyline outside the windows getting blurrier in that warm atmospheric way that had less to do with vision and more to do with the point at which a person stops cataloging exits and starts simply existing in a room. He remembered more conversation, different conversations. The party had started to split into smaller clusters, the formal event dissolving at the edges into something looser and more honest. He found himself talking to Sophia again, just the two of them, the rest of the room humming and distant. He didn't remember when the conversation got serious. He remembered the moment she said something that landed differently than anything else he'd heard that night. "Do you ever get tired," she said, "of being exactly who everyone needs you to be?" He looked at her. She was looking at her glass, not at him, like the question wasn't really aimed at him. Like she was asking it in his direction because she couldn't ask it anywhere else. "Yeah," he said, quietly. "Sometimes." "What do you do about it?" I thought about that. He thought about 4 years of early mornings, and packed lunches, and parent-teacher conferences, and budget spreadsheets, and never not once allowing himself to fall apart, because falling apart was a luxury he hadn't figured out how to afford. "I don't do anything about it," he said. "I just keep going." She looked up at him then. "That's either very strong or very sad." "Some days it's both." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Me too." After that, things got blurry faster than he expected. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that involved anything he would later regret. Just in the way that happens sometimes when a person who had been running on careful discipline for years let themselves exhale, truly, exhale for the first time in a long time. I was tired. He was genuinely tired in a way that went deeper than the late hour. He was tired in the way that can only be relieved by sleep, actual sleep, not the shallow maintenance sleep he got most nights while half listening for Emma. He should have called a car. He tried. He looked at his phone, the Uber app, the map that showed him 45 minutes to his apartment, and something in him, the part that had been operating on emergency reserves since at least Tuesday, refused to do the math. He sat down in a chair. He closed his eyes for what he told himself was 2 minutes. I didn't know that Sophia had watched this happen. He didn't know that she had said quietly to her assistant, who had appeared at her elbow with the practiced invisibility of someone good at their job, "We're not calling him a cab in this state. There's a guest room. Handle it." He didn't know that Marcus, when contacted, had said, "Honestly, that's probably the most rest he's gotten in 2 years. Let him sleep." He didn't know any of that. He just slept, in a chair that was more comfortable than anything he owned, and then somehow in a bed. And then he woke up. The ceiling was wrong. That was the first thing Daniel Carter knew on Friday morning. The ceiling above him was wrong. It was the wrong color, a soft, muted gray instead of the off-white he'd been waking up to for 4 years. The light was wrong, natural, coming from the right instead of the left. The smell was wrong, something clean and warm that had nothing to do with the specific combination of his laundry detergent and Emma's strawberry shampoo that had come to mean home to him. He lay completely still for 3 full seconds, doing what he always did when something didn't compute, gathering data. Ceiling gray. Not his. Light natural right facing. Not his apartment layout. Smell unfamiliar pleasant. Expensive. Like a hotel but quieter. Body fully clothed. Shirt wrinkled. Jacket gone folded on a chair near the door. Phone on the nightstand, battery at 14%, 2 missed calls from Marcus. 1 text from Emma's school confirming tomorrow's math test. He sat up. The room was large and simple. Good furniture, not showy. A single window. His shoes placed neatly at the foot of the bed in a way that suggested someone else had put them there. He stood up. He walked to the door. He opened it. The kitchen was across a short hallway, and the sound of it reached him before the sight did the specific domestic sound of a coffee machine, and the muted televised murmur of morning news. And beneath all of that, the sound of someone moving through a space like they owned it because they did. He stood in the doorway. Sophia Bennett, CEO founder. The name on the building where he had worked for 4 years was standing at a kitchen counter in what appeared to be a cashmere sweater and pajama pants, holding a piece of toast with the betrayed expression of someone who had just discovered that the toaster had once again made its own decisions. The toast was very dark. "I told you medium," she said to the toaster. The toaster did not respond. She turned around. She saw him. A half-beat of something not quite surprise, more like recalibration, crossed her face, and then she smiled. Easy. Unhurried. Like she had been expecting him. "Good morning, honey." Daniel Carter stood in the doorway of a kitchen he didn't recognize, wearing yesterday's clothes, with a pounding head and a mostly dead phone, and zero memory of how he had gotten here. And the CEO of his company was smiling at him, like this was the most ordinary thing in the world. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He said, "need to understand several things." Sophia set the burnt toast on the counter, turned fully to face him, and folded her arms. Not defensively, just comfortably. The way a person does when they've already thought through the conversation they're about to have and feel reasonably good about it. "Coffee first," she said. "Then understanding. Ms. Bennett." Sophia. Her name felt strange in his mouth too, direct, too personal for 7 in the morning in a kitchen he'd never been in before. What happened last night? She picked up a mug. His mug, it turned out already poured, and set it on the counter near him. "You fell asleep in a chair at the party. You refused to call anyone because apparently you had some very strong feelings about not inconveniencing people. You couldn't give my assistant your home address without falling asleep mid-sentence, so I offered you the guest room." She paused. "That's the whole story." He looked at her. "That's it. That's it." Nothing, she said, and her voice had a specific quality, calm and clear, the voice of someone who understood exactly why he needed to ask, and was not offended by the question. "You slept in a guest room. I slept in my room. The kitchen was lonely, and my toaster has a grudge. That's the entire inventory of last night." Daniel exhaled. He picked up the coffee. He drank it. It was, despite everything, excellent coffee. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in a way that covered more than just the coffee, the guest room, the discretion, the matter-of-fact explanation, all of it. "For handling that, you didn't have to." "I know," she said simply. He looked at her. She looked at him. And in the specific, unhurried quiet of that kitchen, with the morning news murmuring in the background, and the burnt toast sitting on the counter between them, like evidence, Daniel Carter had the strangest feeling. He had been in 100 rooms with this woman. Conference rooms, hallways, elevator rides, one full staff meeting where she had spoken for 40 minutes and held the attention of 600 people without ever once looking like she was trying. He had never been in a room with her like this, where she was arguing with a toaster, where she was handing him coffee without asking how he took it, but somehow getting it right, where the CEO image had stayed at the party the night before, and what was left was just a woman in a cashmere sweater having a slightly adversarial relationship with her breakfast-making space for a man she barely knew because it had been the kind thing to do. He didn't know what to do with that. So he did what Daniel Carter always did with things he didn't know what to do with. He set them aside. He picked up his coffee. And he said, "I have to call my daughter." Sophia nodded. "There's a charger on the counter." He plugged in his phone. He called Emma. She answered on the second ring, 8 years old, and entirely awake with the specific morning energy of a child who had been up since 6 because she had math anxiety and absolutely believed that thinking about math more would help. "Daddy, where are you? Mrs. Peterson says I have to show my work, and I know the answers, but I don't know how to show the work. Hey." His voice went soft and steady, the way it always did when she called. "Good morning. I'm fine, I just stayed later than expected last night. Tell me about the problem." Emma told him about the problem. He walked her through it. They spent 6 minutes on long division and 3 minutes on the specific philosophical injustice of being required to explain answers that were obviously correct. And by the end of it, Emma was laughing, and he was too standing in Sophia Bennett's kitchen with his phone at 14% and a mug that had been refilled without him noticing. He lowered the phone. He looked at the refilled coffee. He looked at Sophia, who had her own mug now and was leaning against the counter, not pretending she hadn't heard, not performing discretion. Just existing in her kitchen, the way a person existed in their own space comfortably without apology. "She sounds confident," Sophia said. "She gets nervous before tests. She covers it with math complaints. Smart kid. Takes after her mother." He said it without thinking. And then it was just there in the room, the fact of her Emma's mother, the person whose absence was the central fact of the last 4 years. Sophia didn't flinch. She didn't soften the air with something careful. She just looked at him steadily and said, "She sounds like she has a pretty good father, too." He wrapped both hands around the mug. The morning light came through the kitchen window, and Daniel Carter, who had planned to leave at 10, and had instead ended up here in this kitchen with this woman in this strange early off-schedule morning that didn't belong anywhere in the careful life he had built, thought just for a second that maybe some things couldn't be planned for, and maybe that was all right. I didn't know, standing there with his coffee and his daughter's voice still warm in his ear, that the woman across the counter from him was also recalculating something. He didn't know what she had seen in him the night before. Not just the embarrassing speech about shipping errors, not just the quiet answer about tiredness, but something underneath all of it that she hadn't expected to recognize. I didn't know that Sophia Bennett, who had spent 11 years building something enormous, and stood at the center of it, without ever quite feeling like she belonged, there had watched a man fall asleep in a chair and thought, that's what exhaustion actually looks like. Not dramatic, not tragic. Just a person who had been going for so long that they ran out of going. She hadn't expected to recognize it. She did. And that recognition, that small specific moment of one tired person seeing another tired person clearly, was the beginning of something neither of them had planned, and both of them needed. She refilled his coffee a second time without asking. That was the thing that stayed with him on the drive home. Not the guest room, not the waking up disoriented, not even the "good morning, honey" that had stopped his heart for approximately 4 seconds. It was that second cup of coffee poured quietly while he was on the phone with Emma, set on the counter without announcement or expectation. Small things told you about people. Daniel had learned that a long time ago. He drove home with the windows down, despite the October chill, replaying the morning in pieces, trying to file it somewhere that made sense. A boss who gave an employee a guest room. Perfectly explainable. A successful woman who burned toast and argued with kitchen appliances. Unexpectedly human. A CEO who refilled a stranger's coffee without making it a gesture. He couldn't file that last one anywhere neat. He stopped trying around the third stoplight and just let it sit. Emma was already at school when he got home. He showered, changed, and was at his desk by 9:47, which was late enough that Marcus gave him a look, but not late enough that it required explanation. He returned the look with the specific blankness of a man who had decided that some mornings belonged only to themselves. Marcus lasted until 10:15. "So," Marcus said, appearing at the edge of Daniel's cubicle with his coffee and the expression of a man who had been physically restraining himself. "You want to tell me, or do you want to pretend the whole thing didn't happen?" "Nothing happened. You disappeared from a company party and showed up this morning in yesterday's shirt." "I fell asleep. She offered a guest room. I went home." Marcus stared at him. "She. Ms. Bennett." "You call her Ms. Bennett. She's my boss, Marcus. She told you to call her Sophia." Daniel looked up. "How do you know that?" Marcus had the grace to look slightly caught. Her assistant texted me when you fell asleep to ask if you had any medical conditions they should know about. We may have chatted briefly. About what? About whether you were always this stubborn about accepting help, or if it was a special occasion. Marcus sat down in the empty chair across from Daniel's desk, without being invited, which was a thing Marcus had been doing for 4 years and showed no signs of stopping. She said you thanked her, that you were very polite and very formal, and left as fast as possible without being rude about it. That's accurate. She also said. Marcus paused, and something in his expression shifted from amused to something more careful. She said you called your daughter, and your whole voice changed. Daniel didn't say anything. That's a direct quote, Marcus added. I'm just reporting. Why is my boss reporting information about me to you? She wasn't reporting, she was talking. There's a difference. Marcus turned his coffee cup in his hands. She seemed, I don't know, thoughtful about it, like it meant something to her. Daniel looked at his screen. She's a thoughtful person. Most people don't notice that about her. Most people are busy being intimidated. Marcus was quiet for a second. Then, you're not intimidated by her. She burned toast this morning and blamed the toaster. It's hard to be intimidated by that. Marcus started laughing, the real kind, the kind that surprised him, and Daniel went back to his spreadsheet, and that was how the conversation ended. But it wasn't. Daniel understood very clearly how the thing itself ended. The next 2 weeks moved with the particular pace of something that was accumulating without announcing itself. He saw Sophia in the building the way he always had hallways. Elevator occasional meetings where she presided over 15 people with the focused, unhurried attention that he had always respected. She nodded at him the way she nodded at most people. He nodded back. Professional. Unremarkable. And then, on a Tuesday, she stopped in the hallway. How did Emma do on the math test? He turned around. She was standing behind him with a tablet under her arm and a question on her face that was entirely genuine. She got a 94. He said. Sophia smiled, not the professional smile, the other one. She showed her work, under protest. That tracks. She started walking again, then over her shoulder. Tell her I said good job. She was already gone before he could respond. He stood in the hallway for a second holding that. Then he kept walking. The third week after the party, there was a budget review that ran 2 hours over schedule and ended at 7:45 in the evening when most of the building had gone dark. Daniel was the last one finishing his section of the report, cross-referencing figures that didn't quite balance when he heard someone else still moving through the office. He looked up. Sophia was at the glass-walled conference room across the floor, standing at the window with her arms crossed, her jacket off, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was looking at something on the table. She was very still in the way a person got still when they were thinking hard about something that wasn't resolving. He didn't mean to go over there. He meant to finish his report. He went over there. He knocked on the open conference room door. She looked up. Contractor margins, she said before he could ask. The Northwest Division numbers don't square with what operations submitted. I've been looking at this for 40 minutes. He stepped into the room. Which quarter? Q3. But it's affecting the Q4 projection model. Can I look? She moved aside without hesitation, which was interesting because some executives, even good ones, had complicated feelings about letting people look at their work mid-process. She just moved aside. He looked. He found it in 6 minutes. A transposition error in the contractor hours column that had propagated through 3 subsequent calculations. Small original error, large downstream effect. He pointed it out without making a production of it. She looked at it, looked at him. That's it. That's it. She made the correction. Watched the projection model recalculate. Sat back. I've been starting at that for 40 minutes. Fresh eyes. Sometimes that's all it is. You just saved me 2 more hours. You would have found it. Probably. She looked at him with that direct quality. She had that way of actually seeing the person in front of her, rather than their function. You didn't have to come over. You were very visibly thinking at something, he said. It seemed like the thing could use company. She was quiet for a second. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed soft genuine and said, "That's a very strange thing to say. It's true, though." "It is," she agreed. They stood in the conference room for another moment, the city, dark outside the windows, the building quiet around them, and then she said, "Have you eaten?" "I was going to on the way home. There's food in my office. Real food, not whatever the vending machine is offering. My assistant over-orders, and I end up with enough for 3 people every night." She said it simply without making it an invitation, just an observation about available food. "You're welcome to it." He thought about his empty apartment and his 11% battery phone and the drive home through October traffic. "Sure," he said. "Thank you." I didn't know that was the second beginning. He just thought it was dinner. They ate in her office, which was large but less formal than it appeared in meetings, the kind of space that had been lived in broken in. There were books with actual bookmarks in them. A framed drawing on one wall that looked like it had been done by a child. A whiteboard covered in what appeared to be 3 simultaneous strategic frameworks that had been written over each other in different colors, until they formed something that looked less like business strategy and more like modern art. "What is that?" he asked, nodding at the whiteboard. She looked over her shoulder. "Tuesday." "You mean that's from Tuesday?" "I mean that's what Tuesday looks like in my head." She handed him a container of something that smelled like real food from an actual restaurant. "It's calmer on Mondays. Thursdays are unsalvageable." He looked at the whiteboard. He could actually see the layers, the original framework, the problem that had interrupted it, the secondary framework that had tried to address the problem, the third color that appeared to represent an entirely new direction. "You think in iterations." "I think in arguments with myself," she said. "The whiteboard is where the arguments live." "That's actually very organized." "Most people think it looks chaotic. Most people see the output and miss the process." He sat down in the chair across from her desk. "The process looks fine to me. Better than fine. You've got 3 contingency layers in there." She paused with her fork halfway to her mouth and looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the recalculating look. Like he kept saying things she hadn't expected from the direction she'd expected them. "You can read that," she said. "Operations training. You learn to see how people structure problems." He looked at the whiteboard again. "Whoever taught you to think this way, your MBA program, or whatever it was they taught you well." "Self-taught," she said quietly. He looked back at her. "Seriously, I didn't have an MBA program. I had a failing business and a spreadsheet I didn't know how to use and a library card." She said it without self-deprecation, without pride, just as a fact, the way you stated things you had long since made peace with. "The MBA came later, after I'd already figured most of it out the hard way." "That explains why your thinking doesn't look like anyone else's," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Most people don't mean that as a compliment. I do." She looked at her food. Something moved through her face. Not sadness exactly, more like the feeling you got when something reached you in a spot you'd learned to keep armored. She recovered quickly the way people did when they'd had a lot of practice at it. But he saw it. He didn't mention it. He picked up his own food and said, "Tell me about the Northwest Division problem. There's something in the contractor structure over there that's been bothering me for 6 months, and I've never had the right room to say it." Her eyes came back to him. "Say it." He said it. She pushed back. He pushed back harder. She got up and went to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and started drawing. He stood up and pointed at something she'd written and said that wasn't how the regional contracts actually worked on the ground, and she said she understood that theoretically, but the model required a simplification, and he said the model was wrong then, and she turned around and looked at him with something that wasn't offense, it was interest. Genuine lit-up interest. "Nobody tells me the model is wrong," she said. "I just did." "I know." She looked at the whiteboard. "Show me." He took the marker. They were at that whiteboard for an hour and 20 minutes. When he finally left, the city outside was late-night quiet, and he had 3 missed texts from Marcus that said in chronological order, "Where are you?" Then, "Are you with her again?" Then a single thumbs-up emoji that managed to contain an entire opinion without using any words. Daniel drove home in the dark and thought about the whiteboard. about the way she had handed him the marker without hesitation, about the way she had argued with him not to win, but to get to the right answer, which was a rarer quality than people understood, about the 3 contingency layers, and the library card, and the failing business, and the way she had said self-taught like it was just geography. He thought about the armored spot, the moment when something had landed there and she'd covered it up so fast. He thought about what that took. A lot of years, he suspected. A lot of people saying the wrong thing. He drove home and went to sleep without resolving any of it, because some things needed to be held for a while before they became clear. 3 days later, Emma met her. It was an accident, technically. He had to pick Emma up from school, and there was a scheduling collision, and Emma came to the office for 45 minutes while he finished something that absolutely could not wait. She sat at his desk with a book and her juice box, with the dignity of an 8-year-old who was very experienced at being quiet in adult spaces. She was quiet for 11 minutes. Then she noticed the glass-walled office across the floor, where a woman with dark hair and the focused energy of a person solving several things simultaneously was on the phone, pacing slowly, gesturing at nothing in particular. Emma watched her for a moment. Then she said, "Who's that?" "That's Ms. Bennett. She runs the company." "Like the boss of everyone?" "Yes." Emma considered this. "She looks like she's arguing." "She's probably not arguing. She probably just thinks emphatically." Emma processed this. "What does emphatically mean?" "With a lot of energy." "Oh." Another pause. "I think emphatically too." "I know you do." Sophia came out of her office 20 minutes later, phone call finished, tablet in hand, already moving toward somewhere purposeful. She stopped when she saw Emma. Emma looked up from her book. They regarded each other across the office floor with the specific mutual assessment of 2 people who took the measure of new individuals seriously. Sophia crossed the floor. She crouched down to Emma's level, not in a performed adult being nice to a child way, but in the way of someone who genuinely preferred to have conversations eye to eye. "You must be Emma," she said. "You're the boss of my dad," Emma said. "Technically, yes. He says you think emphatically." Sophia glanced up at Daniel. He was looking at the ceiling. She looked back at Emma. "That might be the best description of me I've ever heard." "I think emphatically too," Emma said. "My teacher says I should practice being more patient." "My board says the same thing," Sophia said. "I haven't figured it out yet either." Emma appeared to find this deeply satisfying, the information that an adult in charge of many things was still working on the same thing she was. "Are you going to be patient when you figure it out?" she asked. "Probably not," Sophia said. "But I'll be better at pretending." Emma laughed. Sudden, delighted, real. And Sophia smiled the smile that reached her eyes and stood up and said to Daniel, "She's exactly how I imagined." He didn't know what to do with that either. He was accumulating a lot of things he didn't know what to do with. What happened next was not dramatic. It was not a single moment. It was an accumulation of unremarkable things that added up to something that in retrospect was inevitable. Coffee before the 9 a.m. leadership meeting. Just coffee, just conversation, just 2 people who both arrived early and had learned that the 10 minutes before a meeting started were the most honest 10 minutes of the day. He brought his from home. She made hers badly and then accepted his verdict on it. This became without discussion a thing. Disagreements that were actually conversations. She proposed something in a cross-departmental meeting and he raised a concern and she heard it. Not just acknowledged it, actually heard it and changed direction. And afterward she said, "You were right about the implementation timeline. No hedging, no qualifying. Just you were right." He couldn't remember the last time a superior had said that to him without attaching something to it. The phone call that lasted an hour and 40 minutes, which started as a question about a vendor contract and became something else entirely around the 40-minute mark when she said, "Do you ever think you made the wrong choices? Not bad choices, just choices that were right for who you were at the time, but maybe not for who you are now?" And he said, "Every day. Do you?" And she was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Every day." They hung up 2 hours later. Neither of them had finished what they'd called about. And then came the Friday that changed the weight of things. It was mid-November, cold enough that the windows were doing the thing where condensation gathered at the edges. He was in her office the third time that week, which was something neither of them was quite naming yet, reviewing a logistics proposal. She was reading. The office was quiet. She said without looking up, "Richard Hale requested a meeting with me next week." He knew Richard Hale. Everyone knew Richard Hale. 55 years old board member since the company's Series C, the kind of man who wore power like a well-fitted suit and believed that appearance was the same thing as substance. He had the polished confidence of someone who had never once been told he didn't look the part. "What does he want?" Daniel asked. "He wants to talk about company image." She said it flatly, with the precise flatness of someone who understood exactly what those words meant and was choosing not to pretend otherwise. He does this every 18 months or so. He finds a way to bring it up: image representation, the face of the brand. "What he actually means," Daniel said. She looked up. "What he actually means." He set down the proposal. "What do you do when he does this?" "I smile and thank him for his perspective, and then I go back to running the company he invested in because it became extraordinarily profitable." Her voice was controlled, but underneath the control, there was something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, something that had been compressed by years of being controlled. And then 6 months later, the board numbers come in, and everyone is satisfied, and the conversation goes away until the next time. And it always comes back. It always comes back. He was quiet for a moment. "Sophia." She looked at him. It was the first time he had used her first name in her office, and they both registered it. "How long?" he asked. Not carefully, not with diplomatic softening. Just the question. She understood it without needing it explained. "Since before I had the funding. Since the first pitch meeting where someone asked after I'd laid out a 5-year plan that was by every metric the most prepared proposal in the room, whether I was sure I wanted to be the public face of this." She paused. "Not because I was too young. Not because I was too inexperienced. Because of—" She gestured at herself briefly, just once. "This." He didn't say "I'm sorry." He had learned she didn't want that. He said, "What did you do in that meeting?" "I got the funding." "And the one after?" "Got that too." "And every time since?" "Every time since," she confirmed. "So you've been winning this fight for over a decade." She looked at him steadily. "Winning and fighting are not the same thing, Daniel. You can win every single battle and still be tired." The room was very quiet. I thought about 4 years of early mornings, of packed lunches and parent-teacher conferences, of doing everything right and still going home to an apartment that was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. "Yeah," he said. "I know." She held his gaze for a long moment, and then something shifted, some carefully maintained professional architecture that she had been holding in place for weeks, maybe longer, quietly adjusted. Not collapsed, just softened. "I don't talk about this," she said. "I know. I don't talk about it because every time I do, someone either feels sorry for me or tells me I should be used to it by now, and I don't know which is worse." "I'm not going to do either," he said. "I know that too." A pause. "That's why I said it." He looked at her. At the woman who had burned toast and argued with a coffee machine on a Friday morning and handed him a marker and said, "Show me," and crouched down to talk to his 8-year-old daughter eye to eye without making it a performance. He thought about the armored spot. He thought about how long it took to build that kind of armor. How many years? How many rooms full of people who looked at what you were and decided before you opened your mouth what you weren't? I thought about Emma saying, "You always figure it out, Daddy." He thought someone needed to say that to this woman, regularly, without agenda. He said, "You built something that works, that succeeds, that people believe in. Not because you overcame what people thought of you, because you stopped waiting for their permission to be what you already were." He paused. "That's not winning despite something. That's just winning." She looked at him for a long time. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at him, with something that was completely unguarded for one single undefended moment, told him he had landed somewhere true. Then she looked down at her desk. "You should finish the proposal." "Right," he said. He picked it up. He did not finish it for another 35 minutes because the conversation continued in the way that honest conversations did, circling back, deepening, finding corners. When he finally left, it was past 8. When he got to the elevator, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he now recognized without needing to check. It said, "Thank you for saying it like that." He stood in the elevator and looked at it. He typed back, "Thank you for trusting me with it." 3 seconds later, "Don't make it weird." He laughed actual surprised laughter alone in an elevator. He typed, "Too late." "Good night, Sophia." Her response came as the elevator reached the lobby. "Good night, Daniel. Drive safe." He pocketed the phone and walked out into the November night and felt something that he hadn't felt in a long time, something that lived just past the edge of careful. He didn't have a name for it yet. But for the first time in 4 years, he didn't immediately try to file it somewhere safe. He just let it be there. Walking to his car in the dark, smiling at nothing, one hand in his pocket, and the city quiet around him. That was enough for tonight. That was more than enough. The Monday after the text exchange, Daniel walked into the office and discovered that people had started talking. He noticed it the way you noticed a change in air pressure, not through any single identifiable thing, but through an accumulation of small signals that added up to something undeniable. A pause when he walked into the break room. 2 people from marketing who stopped a conversation at a slightly unnatural moment. Sarah from accounting, giving him a look that was approximately 40% warmer than her standard workplace friendliness, which meant she had either heard something or decided something about what she had observed. He got coffee. He went to his desk. He opened his laptop. Marcus was at his cubicle in 4 minutes, which was actually slower than usual, which meant Marcus had been trying to give him space and had lasted approximately 4 minutes before his willpower ran out. "How was your weekend?" Marcus asked in the tone of a man asking a different question. "Fine," Daniel said. "Emma had soccer. I fixed a shelf that's been crooked for 8 months. Completely ordinary." "Right." Marcus sat down. "And the text you sent at 8:47 p.m. on Friday from the building's parking garage." Daniel looked at him. "You track my location now. Your read receipt was on, and I was already in the parking garage because I forgot my laptop charger. I saw your car." Marcus spread his hands. "I'm not surveilling you. The universe just keeps putting me in positions of accidental omniscience regarding your life. I was finishing work. You were finishing work in Sophia Bennett's office at 8:47 on a Friday. She had a proposal that needed Daniel." Marcus said it quietly without the joking quality. Just his name level and sincere. "I'm not judging. I'm asking because I'm your friend and I want to know if you're okay." Daniel looked at his screen for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. "I don't know what I am," he said honestly. "I know that there's something there that I didn't expect, and I know that I don't know what to do with it." "That's called being a human person," Marcus said. "It feels reckless. Most real things do at first." Daniel turned back to his screen. "She's my boss. She's also a person. You said that yourself 3 weeks ago." "That was different." "How?" I didn't have an answer for that, which was itself a kind of answer. He and Marcus both understood that, and Marcus left it there, which was one of the reasons he was actually worth being friends with. The Richard Hale meeting happened on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Daniel knew because Sophia's assistant, a precise, quietly competent woman named Grace, who managed Sophia's schedule with the focused energy of an air traffic controller, had blocked the calendar for 90 minutes and written only board consultation in the subject line, which was the calendar equivalent of writing unpleasant but unavoidable. I didn't know what happened in that meeting. He wasn't supposed to know. He was an operations manager. Board consultations were not his territory. He found out anyway because at 4:15 Sophia came out of the conference room, walked directly to his desk without slowing down and said, "Walk with me." He stood up and walked with her. They went to the east stairwell, which was the part of the building where people went to have conversations that needed the specific privacy of a place nobody passed through with intention. He had used it exactly twice before, once during a vendor crisis, once during a conversation with a coworker who needed to cry without an audience. Sophia clearly knew its function. She stopped on the landing between floors. She was holding her tablet, but not looking at it. She was looking at the wall. "I want an external brand consultant to review the company's public image," she said. "Which means he wants someone he has chosen reporting to him with access to board-level discussions to document what he calls alignment gaps between the company's stated values and its perceived identity." Daniel took that apart carefully. "That's a very long way of saying he wants to build a case." "Yes. Against you specifically. Against the direction I've been taking the company." She paused. Same thing, but with more paper between him and the intent. "What did you say?" "I said I would consider it." He looked at her. "You're not going to consider it?" No, she agreed. "But I need time to understand what he actually has before I respond to what he's claiming to want." "What do you think he actually has?" She was quiet for 3 seconds, which was a long time for Sophia. "I think he has 3 board members who are nervous about Q1 projections and willing to blame leadership rather than market conditions. I think he has a narrative ready to go about emotional decision-making and loss of strategic focus. And I think he has been building toward this for 2 years and has been waiting for the right moment." "What moment is he waiting for?" She looked at him then, directly, with the specific steadiness of someone about to say something they've been sitting with for days. "A reason to say that my judgment is compromised." He held her gaze. "You mean us?" "I mean whatever he can make us look like." She said it clinically, the way you described a threat you'd already begun to plan around. "He doesn't need it to be true. He needs it to be discussable. A CEO who has developed a close personal relationship with a subordinate, that's a story that writes itself in a boardroom, Daniel, regardless of what actually happened." I thought about the party, the guest room, the whiteboard, the elevator text. All of it innocent, and all of it, he understood in that moment, usable if someone wanted to use it. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that if you need distance between us professionally for your protection, I understand that. I don't want to be a liability to you." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the only person in this building who has told me the model was wrong and been right about it," she said. "You are the only person who has challenged me in a meeting and then stayed to fix the problem instead of just proving a point. You are the only person here who doesn't want something from me." She paused. "I'm not creating distance from that because Richard Hale is uncomfortable with something he doesn't understand." "Sophia, I'm also not making a decision emotionally," she added. "I'm making it strategically. You are an operational asset, and you are also a person I trust, and both of those things are true at the same time, and neither of them is a problem." She picked up her tablet. "What is a problem is that I need to know what Hale has before Thursday's board call. Which means I need someone who can look at the Q3 financials and tell me if there's anything in there that he could frame as a leadership failure versus a market correction." He recognized what she was doing. She was giving him a task instead of a feeling because the task was safer for both of them right now, and also because she genuinely needed it done. "I can do that," he said. "I know you can." She started toward the stairs, then stopped. "Daniel." "Yeah. I meant what I said, both parts." She went up the stairs. He stood on the landing for a moment, alone, listening to her footsteps recede. Then he went back to his desk and started pulling Q3 financials. He worked until 11 that night. He found 4 items that concerned him, not fraud, not misconduct, just the kinds of quarter-over-quarter variances that could be characterized as instability by someone who wanted to characterize them that way. He documented everything. He built a counter-narrative with supporting data for each one, the kind of thing that would hold up in a boardroom against someone who had prepared an argument, but maybe hadn't prepared for someone who knew the numbers as well as they did. He sent it to Sophia at 11:17 p.m. He wrote 4 potential exposure points, counter-documentation attached. All 4 are defensible. You'll know them better than I do, but this is a starting point. Her response came at 11:42. "This is thorough. This is exactly what I needed. Why are you still awake?" He wrote back. Emma's at a sleepover. The apartment is quiet in a way that makes it hard to stop working. A pause. Then I know that kind of quiet. He looked at that for a moment. Then, are you okay? A longer pause this time. Long enough that he thought maybe she had put the phone down. Then I'll be okay. I always am. But I appreciate you asking. He put his phone down. He looked at his apartment ceiling. His own ceiling. The right color. The familiar off-white. And thought about a woman who ran a company alone and went home to a kind of quiet that meant something different than peace. He thought we are more alike than I knew. I thought that is either a very good thing or a very complicated one. He thought probably both. He went to sleep. Thursday's board call was at 3 p.m. Daniel was not on it. He sat at his desk and worked through a vendor report with the concentration of a man who was doing a very good impression of not thinking about something else. Marcus for once left him alone. Even Marcus understood that some hours needed to simply pass. At 4:47 his phone buzzed, a text from Sophia. 3 words, still standing. Thank you. He exhaled. He typed, told you. She sent back a single period which he had learned was her version of a laugh that she wasn't going to admit to. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to the vendor report with something loosening in his chest. What he didn't know, what he would not know for another 11 days, was that the board call had not gone the way Sophia's 3 words suggested. She was still standing, yes. But Richard Hale had not retreated. He had simply moved differently the way a patient man moved when he had decided to play a longer game. Daniel found out on a Tuesday afternoon in December when Grace appeared at his desk. Grace, location outside Sophia's orbit, was a significant data point, and said in the quiet and precise way she said everything. Ms. Bennett would like to see you. Now, if possible. He followed Grace to the elevator. He noted that Grace did not make small talk on the way, which Grace usually did, because she was professionally pleasant and believed in the social function of small talk. She was not doing that now. She pressed the button for the executive floor and looked at the doors. How bad is it? He asked. Grace looked at him. She was 42 and had worked for Sophia for 6 years and had exactly the kind of loyalty that came from watching someone be worth it over and over again. She'll tell you, Grace said. The elevator opened. He walked into Sophia's office. She was standing at the window, not looking out of it, just standing near it, which was what she did when she needed to be on her feet, but didn't have somewhere specific to direct the energy. She turned when he came in. She looked for the first time since he had known her tired. Not exhausted, she was too controlled for exhaustion, to show cleanly, but tired in the way that lived in the eyes, in the set of the jaw, in the particular stillness of someone who had been holding something heavy for too long. Close the door, she said. He closed it. Hale submitted a formal governance complaint to the board this morning, she said. He's citing what he calls a pattern of decision-making that prioritizes personal relationships over corporate governance. He's attached documentation, timestamps, meeting schedules, internal communication logs that Grace had no business. She stopped, breathed. Someone gave him access to things he shouldn't have. Daniel went very still. Someone inside the company. Yes. How much does he have? Enough to make a story. She walked to her desk. Every late meeting, every schedule overlap, the text messages he can't access content, but he has timestamps and frequency logs. He has framed it as a pattern of inappropriate reliance on a subordinate, as a personal advisor, which he claims represents a conflict of interest and a risk to board-level governance. Can he move on this? He needs 5 votes. He has 3 confirmed. He's working on the other 2. She said it clearly without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. The formal review meeting is in 3 weeks, December 19th. Daniel sat down in the chair across from her desk. He thought through it. What happens at the review meeting? I present. He presents. The board votes on whether to open a formal investigation into my leadership, which would trigger a mandatory 30-day suspension while the investigation runs. And during the 30 days, acting CEO would be appointed by the board. She paused. Richard Hale would chair the selection committee. There it was. The whole architecture of it clean and devastating. Not a direct removal too visible, too easily contested. A suspension. An investigation that could run however long it needed to run. An acting CEO who owed his position to the man who had engineered the vacancy. It was the kind of plan that only worked if the target had no one who understood the game well enough to play it back. He's not actually concerned about governance, Daniel said. No. He wants control of the company. He wants to install someone who will prioritize short-term yield over long-term structure. He's had investors pushing for a more aggressive return model for 2 years. I've been blocking it because it would require cutting the departments that make the company actually functional long-term. If he gets an acting CEO who owes him... She stopped. He gets the company, Daniel said. He gets what he can extract from it, before it becomes someone else's problem. The room was quiet. He looked at her. At the woman who had built this thing, who had fought her way into rooms that didn't want her, and stayed in them until she was undeniable, and who was now watching someone try to dismantle what she'd built, not through performance or merit, but through paperwork and politics and a timestamp log of late-night working sessions. Something moved in him. It wasn't romantic, not in that moment. It was something older and more foundational. The specific anger that came from watching something unfair happen to someone who didn't deserve it, and knowing you were positioned to do something about it. He said, "What do you need from me?" She looked at him carefully. "Daniel, I know what I'm offering. Tell me what you need." If you're involved, he can use it. He'll say you're compromised, that anything you provide is... He's already using the fact that I exist, Daniel said. The only question is whether my existing does you harm or does you good. He leaned forward. I've been through every line of those financials. I know where the bodies are buried, and I know where they aren't. I know the difference between a leadership decision that failed and a market condition that was mischaracterized as one. If he's going to stand in front of a board and build a case from numbers, I'm the person who can take that case apart. You'd be testifying against a board member, in a governance review, as an operational employee. Yes. That's not a small thing, Daniel. That's your career, your reputation, if it doesn't go our way. Then I find another job, he said simply. You're not replaceable. The company isn't replaceable. My operations manager position is, relatively speaking, very replaceable. She stared at him. You would do that, she said slowly, like she was testing whether it was real. You would actually do that. I'm doing it, he said. That's already decided. What I'm asking is what you need from me specifically so we can make it count. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the silence of a crisis, the silence of a plan beginning. She sat down. She pulled a legal pad toward her. Okay, she said. And then quieter, okay. She looked up at him. Then here's what I need. They worked for 3 hours. Marcus texted at 7 p.m. Still at the office. Daniel texted back. Yes. Marcus responded, need company. Daniel wrote, not tonight. Marcus sent, okay, be careful, which was the Marcus equivalent of a full speech about concern and care, and the complications of caring about someone enough to worry about their choices. Daniel put his phone face down and kept working. What happened over the next 11 days was not something either of them talked about publicly. It was late nights and early mornings, and careful documentation, and the specific focused intimacy of two people doing something serious together. It was also woven through all of that. The thing that the task was both covering and revealing the two of them in rooms working, and the understanding between them getting deeper and quieter and more permanent in the way that things became permanent when they had been tested. Emma noticed. Of course Emma noticed. Emma was 8 years old and had her mother's instincts, which had always been the kind that saw through surfaces to what was actually happening underneath. She noticed that her father came home later. She noticed that he was tired in a different way than usual. Not the empty tired, but the kind of tired that had something behind it. She noticed that he smiled at his phone sometimes in the way he used to, never smile at his phone, because his phone was a practical device for scheduling and information, and not a thing that produced the specific expression she was seeing now. She waited until Saturday morning, which was their morning pancakes, and the word puzzle on the back of the cereal box, and no particular hurry about anything. She said in between bites of pancake, "Is Sophia your friend?" He looked up. "Yes, she's my friend. A special friend. She's an important friend." He said it carefully because Emma deserved careful, and also because it was true, in a way that he was still in the process of understanding himself. "She's going through something difficult, and I'm trying to help." Emma processed this. Like how you help Marcus when he has a hard week. A bit like that, more complicated. Because she's the boss. Because it's more serious. He paused. Someone is trying to take her company away from her. Someone who isn't being fair. Emma's face changed the specific, uncomplicated outrage of an 8-year-old who had a very clear internal framework for fairness and exactly zero tolerance for violations of it. "That's not right." "No," Daniel agreed. "It's not." "Are you going to fix it?" He looked at his daughter. At the certainty in her face, not hope, not wish, but certainty, because she was 8 years old, and she believed in him in the complete, uncomplicated way that people believed in the things they had never seen fail them. He thought, "Don't break that. Whatever else happens, don't break that." "I'm going to try," he said. Emma nodded, satisfied. She went back to her pancake. "She's nice," she said. "Sophia. She talks to me like I'm a real person." "You are a real person." "A lot of adults don't talk to kids like that." Another bite. "I like her. You should keep her." He stared at his daughter. She looked up. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Just thinking. About keeping her. About how you got to be so direct." "You," Emma said simply, and went back to her pancake. He sat with that for the rest of the morning. December 19th arrived. The way important days always arrived faster than expected, and heavier than preparation could fully account for. Daniel was at the office by 7 a.m. He had not slept well, not because he was afraid, but because the kind of alertness that came before something significant didn't leave room for sleep. He had his documentation. He had his data. He had gone through every number, every memo, every variance report 3 times, and he knew the material, the way he knew operations, not just the surface of it, but the structure underneath the logic that connected each piece to the next. What he hadn't fully prepared for was the moment he walked into the executive floor and saw Richard Hale in the hallway. Hale was 62, built with the solid confidence of a man who had spent decades in rooms that confirmed his importance. He wore it easily, that confidence. He moved like he had already accounted for the outcome of the day. He looked at Daniel. He took him in the operations manager, the subordinate, the man at the center of his governance complaint, with the particular calm of someone who was not surprised to see him there and also not concerned. "Mr. Carter," Hale said pleasantly. "Mr. Hale," Daniel said. "I wasn't aware operations had a stake in today's meeting." "I'm here as an interested party," Daniel said, "with documentation." Hale's expression didn't change. That was itself informative. A man surprised by information reacted. A man who had already built for contingencies simply adjusted. "I see," Hale said. "Well, I'm sure the board will find that very—" He paused as if choosing a word carefully, thorough. He walked on. Daniel watched him go, turned, found Grace behind him, quiet as always. "She's ready," Grace said. He followed her to the boardroom. Sophia was already inside. She looked at him when he entered, one quick look that said everything it needed to say and nothing it didn't. She was wearing the dark blazer she wore when she needed to walk into a room and be undeniable. She had her materials organized in front of her with the precision of someone who had prepared for this in every specific way available to her. She looked. Daniel thought like someone who had been underestimated for 11 years and had learned exactly what to do with that. The board members filed in. 5 faces. 3 of them already decided. Daniel had studied them, knew which 3 Hale had confirmed. 2 undecided. The 2 that mattered. Hale entered last. He sat. He set his materials down. He looked at Sophia across the table. He said with complete professional courtesy, "Thank you for your time, Sophia. I know this isn't easy." The patronizing warmth in those words, the strategic gentleness of them, the implication packed into, "I know this isn't easy," hit the room like something designed to. Sophia looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. "Let's begin," she said. And the thing that would either save her company or end her tenure in it started with those 2 words in that room on a December morning that nobody outside of it would ever fully know the weight of. Daniel sat against the wall behind her. He had the documentation, he had the numbers, he was ready. And when Hale laid out his first exhibit, a timeline of what he called governance irregularities complete with timestamps and meeting frequency analysis, Daniel looked at the data on that slide and thought, "I know exactly what's wrong with every single number on that page." He waited. His moment would come, and he was not going to waste it. Richard Hale spoke for 22 minutes. Daniel counted. He sat against the wall behind Sophia's chair and counted every minute of it, not because the time mattered, but because counting gave him something to do with the focused, controlled energy that had been building in him since 7 a.m. He needed it contained. He needed it precise. He needed it ready. Hale was good. Daniel had expected that, and still found himself respecting the craft of it, the way you could respect a dangerous thing for being effectively what it was. Hale did not attack Sophia directly. He was too experienced for that. He built his case, the way a skilled attorney built a case, through implication, through pattern, through the careful arrangement of individually defensible facts, into a shape that suggested something none of those facts standing alone could prove. The timeline of meetings, the frequency of after-hours schedule overlaps, the communications log, not content, just volume, just timestamps, just the visible architecture of 2 people who had been talking more than a board member believed was professionally appropriate. He called it a pattern of over-reliance on informal advisory relationships outside established governance channels. He said the words, emotional decision-making, once carefully, and then did not say them again because he didn't need to. He had pointed at the shape of the thing and let the board members' imaginations fill it in. How was finished by 10:40. He set his materials down, folded his hands, and looked at the board with the composed certainty of a man who believed he had already won. One of the undecided board members, a woman named Patricia Weston, 60 years old, the company's longest-tenured board member, and the one whose vote Daniel had spent the most time thinking about, wrote something on her notepad. He couldn't see what it was. Her expression gave nothing. The second undecided member, a man named James Cho, 48, the newest board member and the one with the deepest background in operational finance, looked at the timeline slide still projected on the screen. He was looking at the numbers. Daniel recognized that look, the look of someone whose instinct was telling them something didn't quite sit right, but who hadn't found the specific thing yet. The board chair looked at Sophia. "Ms. Bennett, you have the floor." Sophia stood. She did not look at her notes. She looked at the board, all 5 of them, and she took exactly 1 breath, and then she began. She started with the numbers. Not her defense, the company's numbers. Revenue trajectory over the period Hale had characterized as unstable leadership. Client retention rates. Employee performance metrics. The specific operational improvements in the Northwest Division that had been the source of the Q3 variance. Hale had flagged improvements that had cost them in the short quarter and saved them substantially in the 2 that followed. She spoke clearly and without apology, and Daniel watched the board as she spoke, and he watched James Cho's posture change incrementally as the numbers built a different picture from the one Hale had presented. Cho leaned forward, almost imperceptibly the way analysts leaned when data was landing. Patricia Weston had stopped writing. She was watching Sophia. Her expression was still unreadable, but she was watching with the particular attentiveness of someone who had made up her mind to actually listen. Sophia presented for 18 minutes. Then she stopped. She looked at Hale directly the first time she had addressed him, rather than the full board, and she said, "The concern being presented today is not at its foundation about governance. It is about a board member's disagreement with my strategic direction, specifically regarding the long-term investment model that I have been protecting against short-term extraction pressure for the past 2 years. She paused. I am happy to defend that strategy. I am also prepared to demonstrate that what has been characterized as informal advisory relationships represents standard operational consultation that has been selectively documented to construct a narrative. Hale's expression remained pleasant. It was the pleasantness of a man who had prepared for this response and was not concerned by it. The board has seen the documentation, Sophia. The board has seen selected documentation, she said. I'd like to show them the rest. She looked at the board chair. With the board's permission, I'd like to ask Daniel Carter from Operations to present supplementary financial analysis. Hale's pleasantness shifted. Not dramatically, just a tightening at the corners, a recalibration. The subject of Mr. Carter's involvement is itself part of the governance concern, he said smoothly. It would be somewhat irregular to... Mr. Carter prepared an independent financial analysis of the Q3 variance data that forms the basis of your timeline, Sophia said, still looking at the board chair. The analysis is operational in nature. Mr. Carter is the most qualified person in this company to present it. His personal relationship with me is irrelevant to the accuracy of the numbers. She paused one beat. Unless the board is suggesting that mathematical accuracy is subject to governance review. Patricia Weston made a sound that was almost not quite but almost a short laugh. She covered it with a cough. James Cho was looking at the table with the expression of a man working very hard to keep his face neutral. The board chair said, Mr. Carter may present. Daniel stood up. He walked to the front of the room. He looked at his materials for exactly 2 seconds because he knew them, and he needed the board to see that he knew them. Not performing confidence, just demonstrating that what he was about to say came from a place of actual knowledge, not prepared talking points. He started with the contractor margin error. The same transposition he had found in her office 2 months ago, the one that had propagated through 3 calculations and created a variance that looked, if you didn't trace it to its source, like a series of poor decisions. He walked the board through the trace. He showed them the origin point. He showed them how the downstream effect worked. He showed them that the corrected figures which had been submitted in the Q3 amendment matched the pattern of a market correction, not a leadership failure. James Cho interrupted him at minute 4. You're saying the original filing error was administrative, not strategic. Yes, and the amendment was filed within the required window. The timeline Mr. Hale presented uses the original filing date, not the amendment date, which creates a gap that implies a 6-week delay in identification. The actual identification and correction happened in 48 hours. Cho looked at the slide. Why isn't the amendment date on his timeline? I don't know, Daniel said. He looked at Hale. Mr. Hale, can you speak to the data source for the timeline dates? Hale's pleasantness held. The data was compiled by an external consultant with access to the archived filings. The archived original filings, Daniel said, or the complete record including amendments? A pause. Brief, but there. The initial documentation set. So the timeline reflects an incomplete record, Daniel said. He said it simply without accusation in his voice, just as a fact being established for the people in the room. I want to make sure the board is clear on that. The document that forms the primary basis of the governance complaint is built on an incomplete dataset. The room was quiet. Patricia Weston wrote something on her notepad. This time her expression was not unreadable. It was the expression of a woman who had been on this board for 16 years and who recognized with the specific recognition of long experience what she was watching. She was watching someone's case fall apart at the foundation. Daniel moved to the second item, then the third. Each one followed the same structure, the data as Hale had presented it. Then, the complete data, then the specific mechanism by which the incomplete version had created a misleading picture. He did not say Hale had lied. He did not say anything that could be characterized as a personal attack. He simply showed the board 2 versions of the same reality and let them do the arithmetic. He was at the 4th item when Hale interrupted. I appreciate the operational perspective, Hale said, and his voice had changed, still controlled, still professional, but with an edge under it, now that hadn't been there before. But I think the board understands that a subordinate presenting in defense of his direct superior raises its own governance questions. Mr. Carter has a personal investment in the outcome of this review that the board should weigh appropriately. Daniel looked at him. That's true, he said. I work for Ms. Bennett, and I have professional respect for her leadership. The board should weigh that. They should also weigh the fact that the data I'm presenting is verifiable through the company's own financial system by anyone in this room with access credentials. He looked at Cho. Mr. Cho, would you like to pull the amendment filing directly? I can give you the document number. Cho looked at the board chair. A brief exchange. The board chair nodded. Cho opened his laptop. 40 seconds of typing. Cho looked up. The amendment is there. Filed within 48 hours of the original as Mr. Carter described. Amendment date is not reflected in the submitted timeline. Hale said nothing. Cho looked at Hale. Richard, was the amendment data available to your consultant? I would need to verify what access was provided. Because if it was available and wasn't included, that's a significant documentation concern. Hale's expression maintained its pleasant quality through what appeared to be considerable structural effort. I'm confident any omissions were inadvertent. 4 separate items, Daniel said, quietly, not pushing, just noting. The room held that for a moment. Patricia Weston put her pen down. She looked at Hale. Richard, she said in a voice that had 16 years of board experience in it, and exactly 0 patience for what she had just watched happen. I think we need to table this review pending a complete audit of the source documentation. Patricia. All of it. Original filings amendments, the full communication record, the complete operational data set. Not a selected subset. She looked at the board chair. I'll make a formal motion. Seconded, said Cho. Hale looked at the board chair. The board chair was writing. The 2 confirmed Hale votes were looking at the table. The math had changed, and everyone in the room understood it. A 5-member board with 2 abstentions and a motion from the longest tenured member to table that was not the outcome Hale had designed for. The board chair looked up. Motion to table the governance review pending full documentation audit. All in favor. Patricia Weston, James Cho, the board chair. 3 votes. Motion carried. Hale gathered his materials. His face had returned to its professional neutral, the kind of neutral that cost something to maintain. He stood. He looked at Sophia, not at Daniel. At Sophia, and he said with careful, measured courtesy, I look forward to continuing this conversation when the full record is available. She looked at him steadily. So do I. He left. The remaining board members filed out in the way. People filed out of a room where something significant had happened with the careful, slightly muted quality of individuals who needed to process before they could perform normalcy again. James Cho paused near the door. He looked at Daniel. He said, Good work, and walked out. Patricia Weston stopped beside Sophia. She was quiet for a moment. Then, he'll try again. I know, Sophia said. Make sure the full record is always accessible, not just when someone asks for it. She looked at Sophia, a long, direct woman-to-woman look that carried things words were too small for. Don't let them make you smaller. I've been watching you run this company for 4 years. I know what it's worth. She left. The room was empty. Daniel and Sophia stood in it. Both of them very still. The way people were still in the aftermath of something that had required everything they had. She turned and looked at him. He looked at her. She said, You called him out directly. I didn't tell you to do that. No, he agreed. You didn't ask. No. She looked at him for another moment. Her expression was doing something complicated, something that was gratitude, and something that was recognition, and something underneath both of those that was the specific, unguarded look of someone seeing a thing they hadn't let themselves look at directly before. She said, Daniel, yeah. Why did you do that? He thought about the honest answer. He thought about 4 years of safe choices. He thought about Emma at the kitchen table saying, keep her with the serene certainty of someone who understood what mattered. He thought about a woman arguing with a toaster at 7 in the morning and handing him a marker and saying, show me in texting. Don't make it weird in an elevator moment, and meaning it, and also not meaning it at all. Because it was right, he said. And because he stopped. He had spent 4 years not finishing certain sentences. He finished this one. Because you matter to me. Not because you're my boss. Because you're you. And I wasn't going to sit in the back of the room and watch someone tear that down when I could do something about it. The silence in the boardroom was very different from the silence that had been in it 20 minutes ago. She looked at him with the completely unguarded expression she allowed herself approximately once every several weeks, the one that lived underneath all the control and the competence and the years of armor. She said, "This is going to be complicated." "Yes," he said. "You work for me." "I know. People are going to say things. They're already saying things. Hale built an entire governance complaint on things." She almost smiled. "That's not reassuring. It's honest." He moved toward her slightly, not dramatically, just the specific movement of a person closing a distance that had existed between them for longer than either of them had formally acknowledged. "Sophia, we can talk about every complication. We should talk about every complication. But I want to be clear about something first before the complications." She looked at him. "I'm not here because you're powerful. I'm not impressed by the building or the title or the number. I'm here because you burn toast, and you think in arguments with yourself, and you crouch down to talk to my 8-year-old daughter eye to eye, because that's how you believed she deserved to be talked to." He paused. "That's who I'm talking about. That person, not the CEO." She held his gaze for a long moment. Her eyes were bright in a way that she would have controlled in any other setting. She said, "For someone who spent 4 years avoiding everything you got very direct very suddenly." "I'm catching up," he said. She laughed. Real surprised warm. And then she did something he hadn't expected. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. Just that. Just her hand on his forearm briefly in the quiet of a room that had just tried to take something from her and failed. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it." "Anytime," he said. She squeezed once and let go. And he understood that was the right pace. Not rushed, not restrained, just right. They walked out of the boardroom together. Grace was in the hallway. She looked at Sophia's face, then at Daniel's, then back at Sophia's, and the specific professional composure she maintained in all situations held for approximately 2 seconds before something warm and relieved crossed her expression. "The motion carried," Sophia said. "Tell legal to pull everything for the audit. Complete record. I want it organized before Hale's consultant asks for access." "Already started," Grace said. "I began pulling it when you walked into that room." Sophia looked at her. "You knew he had incomplete data." "I had a feeling," Grace said in the tone of a woman who had a great deal more than a feeling and had acted on it competently and quietly. The amendment logs were conspicuously absent from his request. Sophia stared at her for a moment. Then, "Grace, what would I do without you?" "Function significantly less well," Grace said pleasantly. "I've organized lunch in your office. You should eat." The normalcy of it. The lunch, the practical grounded care of it, broke the remaining tension in a way that nothing else could have. Sophia laughed and Daniel laughed, and Grace maintained the serene competence of someone who understood that the best thing you could do for people after a crisis was give them a sandwich and something ordinary to stand on. The lunch was quiet. The two of them in her office, food on the desk between them, the city going about its business outside the windows. Neither of them tried to process everything at once. They ate. They talked about small things. Emma's upcoming winter concert. The vendor report. Daniel still had not finished a movie Sophia had started watching the night before and abandoned after 20 minutes because it required a kind of patience she apparently did not have for fictional situations when real ones were sufficiently demanding. It felt, Daniel thought, like a different kind of morning after. Not the disoriented whose ceiling is this morning of 2 months ago. Something more deliberate, more chosen. He said at some point during the second half of the lunch, "I need to tell you something." She looked up. "I've been thinking about leaving the company." He said it directly before the carefully measured version of himself could rephrase it into something more cautious. "Not because of today. This has been building. I've been doing operations consulting work on the side for 6 months, mostly for small companies that need the kind of structural thinking I can offer and can't afford a full-time hire. I'm good at it. Maybe better at it than I've been at anything in a while. She was quiet for a moment. You're serious? Yes. When did you decide this? I started thinking about it in September. I'm telling you now because it felt dishonest not to. You should know. She looked at him steadily. He had expected a reaction, some response to the information. What he hadn't expected was the specific quality of her silence, which was not hurt and not professional calculation. It was something more considered. She said, "If you leave the company, the governance complication goes away." He stared at her. "That's not why I'm telling you." "I know it isn't." She set down her fork. "But it's true. And I want you to know that I understand that it doesn't change anything. You're not telling me this to solve a problem. You're telling me this because it's the truth," he said. "And I don't want things between us built on anything except the truth." She looked at him for a long moment. And then she said something he hadn't expected. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for building that. For not just staying somewhere safe because it was safe." He held that. It landed somewhere specific, somewhere that had needed exactly that word from exactly that person. "It might not work," he said. "Most good things might not," she said. "You do them anyway." He picked up his coffee. "When did you get optimistic?" "I had a good morning." He smiled. She smiled. And that was the moment, not the boardroom, not the testimony, not even the hand on his arm. That small, easy exchange over lunch. That was the moment Daniel Carter understood that what he felt for this woman was not a complication or a risk or a thing to be filed somewhere safe. It was the most real thing that had happened to him in 4 years. And he was done being afraid of real things. The weeks that followed the board meeting were not uncomplicated. Daniel had told the truth when he said they should talk about every complication, and they did. They talked about the power differential and how to navigate it while he was still employed at the company. They talked about what people would say, what some people were already saying, and whether that mattered, and in what ways, and to what degree. They talked about Emma and what it meant to bring someone into the life of an 8-year-old who had already experienced one fundamental loss, and how careful that required being, and whether careful was the right word, or whether intentional was closer to it. Sophia was honest in those conversations in a way that cost her something. Each time Daniel could see it, the habit of self-protection. The learned instinct to keep the vulnerable parts behind the capable parts, resisting and then releasing incrementally. She told him about the investor who had told her she wasn't the right image. She told him about the second-round pitch meeting where she had worn a different suit and changed her presentation format and walked in already performing a version of herself she thought they wanted, and how she'd gotten the funding and hated herself for it afterward, and how that self-hatred had become a kind of fuel. "You built something that works," he had said back in November in her office. She had remembered it. She told him she had thought about it a lot. "It landed differently than you knew," she said. "How?" "Because you didn't say it the way people usually say it. You didn't say it to make me feel better. You said it because you looked at the evidence, and that's what the evidence said." She paused. "You treat me like data, in the best possible way." He laughed at that. "I'll put it on a card." She threw a pen at him. He caught it. And that somehow was also important, the ease of it. The way they had arrived without a formal agreement or a defined moment at a place where they could throw pens and catch them and have it mean something. Marcus noticed the change before Daniel fully understood it himself. They were at lunch, a regular lunch, nothing significant. A Tuesday in January, and Marcus put down his sandwich and said, "You look different." "Different how?" "Like yourself, which sounds strange, but I mean it literally. You've looked like a responsible approximation of yourself for 4 years. This is..." Marcus gestured vaguely. "You, the actual one." Daniel didn't say anything. "She did that," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "I think I did it," Daniel said. "She just made it easier to." Marcus picked up his sandwich again. "That's what good people do," he said. They make it easier to be what you actually are. He paused. I've been waiting 4 years to have a conversation with the real version of you. You could have said something. I said things constantly. You weren't listening. Fair point. January moved forward. Daniel filed the paperwork for his consulting company on the 17th. He told Sophia the same day. She said, Name. Carter Operational Solutions. I know it's boring. It's clear, she said. Clear is underrated. He gave his notice 3 days later. The official transition was 6 weeks long enough to train his replacement and hand off the active projects he cared about maintaining correctly. He drafted the handover documents himself in detail because he was incapable of doing the work halfway, even when the work was leaving. His last week at Bennett Innovations, 3 things happened. The first, Richard Hale resigned from the board. The audit had completed. The documentation gaps were not officially characterized as deliberate. They were characterized as procedural oversights by an external consultant. But the board had seen the complete record, and Patricia Weston had seen the complete record, and Richard Hale had apparently done his own mathematics and arrived at a conclusion about the trajectory of his continued board membership. He resigned on a Wednesday. His statement was brief and professionally phrased and contained no acknowledgement of anything specific. Sophia read it, set it down, and went back to work. She said only, good. The second Emma's Winter concert, which Daniel had missed 2 years running because of scheduling conflicts, which he attended this year in the 3rd row, and which Sophia attended beside him, because Emma had given her a handmade invitation on a piece of notebook paper that said in Emma's careful printing, Please come if you want. It would make my dad happy, and also I'm going to sing the loud part. Emma sang the loud part. She was objectively not the most musically gifted child in the 3rd grade. She was, without question, the most committed. She sang with the total investment of someone who had decided that the correct way to do a thing was to do it completely. Daniel watched her and felt the specific, overwhelming fullness of a moment that was too large for its container. He heard Sophia exhale softly beside him. Not quite a sound, just a breath, just the evidence of being moved by something. And he did not look at her. He just let the moment be what it was. Afterward, Emma ran to them and threw her arms around Daniel, and then after approximately 2 seconds of decision-making, also threw her arms around Sophia, who held her with the ease of someone who had been waiting for exactly that without knowing it. Emma pulled back. She looked at Sophia. Did you hear the loud part? I heard every word, Sophia said. Was it good? It was the best part of the entire concert. Emma beamed. Then she turned to Daniel. She's staying, Emma announced. The tone was not a request. It was a statement of organizational fact delivered by the person who had apparently decided she was in charge of such things. Daniel looked at Sophia. Sophia was looking at him with that expression, the completely open one, the one without armor. Yeah, he said. She's staying. The third thing that happened that final week, his last day, a Friday in late January, quiet in the way last days at a job were always quiet. The bittersweet specific quiet of an ending that was also a beginning. He packed his desk, which took less time than he expected, because he had never been a person who accumulated much personal material in professional spaces. He shook hands with people. He received the card that Sarah from accounting had organized, and which had been signed by everyone on the floor, including several people he hadn't known were aware of his name, which was the specific touching absurdity of a sincere workplace gesture. He shook hands with Marcus, who said, Don't be a stranger, and if you are, I will show up at your apartment. Which was not a threat so much as a schedule commitment. He went to Sophia's office last. Grace let him in. Sophia was at her desk. She looked up when he came in. She stood. He said, I'm heading out. She said, I know. He said, I'll see you Saturday. Saturday was dinner. Not a first date they had decided together that framing it as a first date after everything that had preceded it was both inaccurate and unnecessarily ceremonious. It was dinner. Between two people who knew each other well and were choosing to know each other further. She said Saturday. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. He said, for the record, the first morning, in your kitchen. She tilted her head slightly. What about it? I didn't know then, but I think I was already. He stopped, found the right word. Already paying attention. In a way I wasn't paying attention to anything else. She looked at him across the office, across all the weeks, and the whiteboard, and the boardroom, and the burnt toast, and the pen she'd thrown that he'd caught. She said quietly, "Me too." He nodded once. He walked out. In the elevator going down, he felt the specific lightness of a man who had put down something heavy and discovered that his hands were free. Not empty. Free. The elevator opened on the lobby. He walked out into the January afternoon. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. It said, "Don't be late Saturday." He smiled. He typed back, "I'm never late." Her response. "You were late the morning you woke up in my guest room." Technically, he stood on the sidewalk laughing at his phone in January, with a consulting company that was 3 weeks old, and a daughter who had announced that the woman he was falling in love with was staying, and a Saturday that was 3 days away, and felt for the first time in a very long time, like something he was genuinely looking forward to. He pocketed his phone. He walked to his car. He drove home in the afternoon light, and for the first time in 4 years, the apartment was not quiet in the wrong way. It was just quiet, and it was fine, because Saturday was coming, and he was ready. Saturday arrived the way Daniel had hoped it would, without incident, without drama, without anything requiring him to cancel or reschedule or redirect his attention to something more urgent. He drove to Sophia's house at 6:45, with Emma's voice still in his head from that morning when she had stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him get ready, and delivered her assessment with the frank authority of someone who had opinions and saw no reason to keep them private. "You look nervous," Emma said. "I'm not nervous. Your jaw is doing the thing." "My jaw doesn't do a thing." "It does when you're nervous. It did it before my parent-teacher conference, and before you called the insurance company about the car, and before—" "Emma, I'm just saying." She took a bite of her toast. "You don't have to be nervous. She already likes you." He looked at his daughter. "How do you know that?" Emma gave him the look. The patient, slightly exhausted look of an 8-year-old who felt she had explained obvious things too many times. "Because of how she looks at you when you're not looking at her," she said. "That's how you know." He stood in the kitchen in his good jacket and said nothing. Emma said, "Also, she came to my concert. People don't do that for people they don't like." He drove to Sophia's with his jaw doing the thing, and Emma's logic sitting in the passenger seat with him, taking up more space than logic usually did. Sophia opened the door before he knocked. She was wearing something that was neither formal nor casual, but occupied the specific territory between them that said she had thought about it and arrived somewhere intentional. She looked at him. He looked at her. They had stood in a boardroom together 3 weeks ago and said things that mattered. They had eaten lunch together in her office and thrown a pen and been easy with each other in a way that neither of them had been easy with anyone in a long time. This was different. This was chosen deliberately with no task to hide behind and no crisis to focus through. She said, "You made it." He said, "I told you I'm never late." She said, "You were 3 minutes early, which means you've been in your car around the corner for 5 minutes convincing yourself to walk up." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Your driveway is long," he said. She smiled. She stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. The house was the same house he had woken up in 4 months ago, bewildered and wrinkled with no memory of how he'd arrived. He knew it differently now. He knew the kitchen where she burned toast and argued with machines. He knew the hallway where she moved fast in the morning because she was always running through the next 3 problems before she'd finished the current one. He knew the specific quality of the quiet in it. Not empty quiet, not lonely quiet, but the quiet of a place that had been built to hold one person and was considering what it meant to hold more. They had dinner. They talked. The conversation did not require effort, which was itself the thing, the ease of it, the specific comfort of 2 people who had already been through enough together that small talk was a choice rather than a requirement. They talked about Emma's math quiz, which she had apparently aced through a combination of genuine understanding and what Emma called aggressive showing of work. They talked about the consulting company, which had picked up its 3rd client in February, and was growing in the particular organic way that things grew when they were built on actual competence rather than marketing. They talked about the company, which Sophia described as navigating a post-hail clarity. The board, with Richard gone, had moved to consolidate the long-term investment structure she had been protecting, and for the first time in 2 years, she was running the strategy she actually believed in without fighting the same battle every quarter. "How does that feel?" Daniel asked. She thought about it honestly. "Like I forgot what it felt like to just work," she said, "without spending 30% of my energy defending the right to work. That 30% is going to be interesting to have back. I've already started 3 new initiatives. In 3 weeks. 4, she corrected. And a half." He looked at her. "Sophia, are you resting at all?" "I'm resting right now. This is dinner. Dinner with someone whose company I enjoy. That counts." She picked up her glass. "Don't therapize me, Daniel. It doesn't suit you. Someone has to. Grace does it more efficiently. Grace is your assistant. Grace is a human being of exceptional quality who expresses concern through calendar management. We all have our methods." She looked at him over the rim of her glass. "You express concern by showing up. Also very effective." He looked at her for a moment. "I want to say something." "You're going to say it whether I want you to or not." "Yes." He set his fork down. "I spent 4 years making sure I didn't need anything I couldn't provide myself. I convinced myself it was for Emma, keeping things stable, keeping things safe, and some of it was. But some of it was just easier. Not needing anything meant not risking anything." He paused. "You woke something up that I thought I'd put away permanently. And I want you to know that I don't take that lightly. What that means. What you mean." Sophia was quiet. The specific quality of her quiet was the one he'd learned, not absence, but attention. She was holding what he'd said the way she held important data carefully before responding. She said, "The first morning, when you called Emma." He nodded. "The way you talked to her." She looked at her glass. "I was standing at the counter and I heard your voice change and I thought that's what it looks like. When someone is someone's home." She paused. "I haven't had that. Not since I was young. I've had success. I've had the building with my name on it. But I haven't had a person whose voice changed when they talked to me." He said, "It changes." She looked up. "My voice," he said. "When I'm talking to you. I don't know if you've noticed." She held his gaze for a long moment. And then she said something that cost her something to say. He could see it. The habit of protection releasing one more degree. "I noticed." They sat with that. The dinner settled into something that was not a first date, and not just dinner. It was a beginning that understood it was already partway through being something. It was 2 people who had arrived at each other through the specific accumulation of difficult and ordinary moments, and who had decided separately, and then together, that the arrival was worth it. He did not leave until 10:30. At the door she said, "Drive safe." He said, "You said that to me once before. In a text, from an elevator. You remember the specific location." "I remember most things," she said. "Then I remembered that one especially." He looked at her for a moment. And then he did what he had been thinking about for longer than he could specifically account for. He leaned forward and kissed her. Brief. Certain. Not a question which was different from how he'd imagined it, because he had imagined it as uncertain, and it turned out to be the opposite. It was the least uncertain thing he had done in years. She looked at him when he stepped back. She said, "You took your time with that." "I was being intentional. You were being careful. Both things can be true." She almost smiled. "Same time next Saturday." "Yes," he said. He drove home in the dark and felt what he felt and did not try to categorize it. He just let it be there, full and unmanageable and entirely welcome. The spring came fast. Carter Operational Solutions passed its 6-month mark with 5 active clients, a referral pipeline that Marcus, who had become Daniel's unofficial advisory board of one, described as embarrassingly healthy for a company that still doesn't have a real website, and a revenue number that had crossed the threshold Daniel had set as his first-year goal in March, which was the 3rd month. Emma turned 9 in April. Sophia came to the birthday dinner. Emma had requested a specific restaurant, the kind with the bread basket that refilled automatically, and had prepared a list of conversation topics in advance, which she presented to Sophia at the table, with the organizational pride of someone who had learned from the best. Sophia took the list, looked at it, looked at Emma. "You alphabetized these." "It's more efficient," Emma said. Topic 3. Favorite historical leaders. You have 2 options marked with asterisks. Those are the ones I want to talk about most. The asterisks indicate priority. Sophia looked at Daniel. He shrugged. She looked back at Emma. "I'm going to need to up my preparation for future dinners." Emma beamed. "I can send you a pre-read." "Please do," Sophia said seriously. They talked about historical leaders for 40 minutes. Sophia had opinions that surprised Emma and delighted her. Emma had rebuttals that surprised Sophia and appeared to do the same. Daniel ate his food and watched the two of them argue about whether Abraham Lincoln or Frederick Douglass had more impact on the trajectory of American democracy, and felt something he didn't have a word for, something that was past happiness, something that was closer to rightness. After dinner in the car home, Emma said from the back seat, "She argued with me. I noticed. She didn't just agree with me to be nice. She actually thought I was wrong about Douglass, and she said so." "Does that bother you?" Emma was quiet for a second. "No, I like it. It means she takes me seriously." A pause. "Mom used to do that. Argue with me when she thought I was wrong." The car was quiet. Daniel said, "Yeah, she did." Emma said, "Sophia's different from Mom, but She searched for the word with the deliberateness of a child who understood that words mattered. "She's good in a similar way. Like the same kind of good, even if it looks different." He kept his eyes on the road. His jaw was not doing the thing. Something else was happening in his throat, some compression that required a moment to manage. "Yeah," he said when he could. "She is." Emma was asleep before they got home. He carried her to her bed, which she was almost too big for, and would absolutely object to if she were awake, and stood in her doorway for a moment, looking at his daughter, 9 years old. Her mother's instincts, his stubbornness, entirely her own person, and thought about what she had said. The same kind of good, even if it looks different. He thought Emma is right about most things. I should probably be taking notes. May brought something he had not anticipated. Sophia called him on a Thursday afternoon, not a text, a call, which she did when something required more than words on a screen. He answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." A pause. "Why is your first assumption that something's wrong?" "Because you called instead of texting." "I call sometimes." "You text. You call when something requires a conversation." "Fine. Something requires a conversation." He heard her exhale. "I've been asked to speak at the National Women's Business Leaders Conference. Keynote. In September." He waited. "That's significant. I turned it down twice before," she said. "Last year and the year before. I told them I wasn't available." I understood. He understood completely. The conference. The keynote. The specific visibility of standing in front of that audience. Women in business, women who were watching, women who would see her and hear her, and decide something about what was possible. And the specific terror of being seen that fully, of being the symbol of something, when you were still in the process of deciding what you thought about your own story. "What changed?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Someone told me I was winning. Not despite something, just winning." A pause. "I've been thinking about that for 6 months." He sat down. "Are you going to say yes?" "I'm thinking about it." "What's the thinking about part done?" "What I would say. What it means to say it publicly." She paused. "I've told you things I haven't told most people. Some of those things, the investor who said I wasn't the right image. The pitch meeting where I changed my suit. The years of fighting for the right to just work. Those are not small things to stand up and say in front of a room of people." "No," he agreed. "They're not. But they're also—" She stopped. "True," he said. "True," she agreed quietly. "And maybe, Another pause. Maybe the true things are exactly what that room needs to hear. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Sophia, say yes. She was quiet on her end. He said, you spent 11 years building the proof. That conference is just where you say it out loud. He heard her breathe. Then, you're going to make me cry and I'm in my office. Grace will handle it. She made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale. You're insufferable. Say yes. Fine, she said. I'll say yes. He said, good. She said, I need you to know that I made this decision based on my own assessment of the situation, and not because... Sophia. What? I know. A pause. Okay. A shorter pause. Thank you. Anytime. She said yes. The conference was September. She spent the summer preparing in the way she prepared for everything rigorously, in arguments with herself, in iterations on the whiteboard in her office that Daniel saw in stages, and which by July had taken on the quality of something real and specific and true, rather than something performed. He read early drafts. He was honest about them. She pushed back. He pushed back harder. She threw a pen. He caught it. They had refined this dynamic to something that worked, that actually made the thinking better, that left both of them with sharper versions of what they were trying to say. In August, Emma came to Sophia's house on a Saturday that had started as a family dinner and evolved somewhere around dessert into Emma deciding she was staying to help Sophia practice the speech. Emma had a feedback style that could generously be described as direct and accurately be described as merciless, and she applied it without apology to 3 full run-throughs of the keynote, at the end of which she said, the middle part about the investors is the best part, but you say it too fast. Slow down there. That's the part people need to hear. Sophia stared at her. How do you know that? Because it's the part where your voice changes, Emma said. Like how Dad's voice changes when he talks to you. That part's real. Let them hear it. The room was quiet. Daniel looked at his daughter. Sophia looked at Emma for a long, unguarded moment. Then she said in a voice that was very controlled, and therefore signaling that it needed to be, Your extraordinary Emma Carter. Emma picked up her juice box. I know, she said comfortably. Can we have more cake? September arrived. The conference was in New York. Daniel drove to the airport with Sophia at 4:45 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, which was the kind of hour that belonged to people with early flights, and the kind of people who showed up for things that mattered, regardless of what the clock said. She was quiet on the drive. He didn't fill the quiet. He had learned the difference between her silences, the working ones, the tired ones, the scared ones. This one was the preparation kind, the going inside kind. At the terminal she got out. She got her bag. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at him. She said, What if I get up there and I can't say it? The investor part. What Emma said. What if I get to that part and I... You won't, he said. You can't know that. I know you, he said simply. You'll get to that part and your voice will change, and the people in that room will hear it. And some of them, some woman in that room who has been sitting with something she thought she'd never say out loud, is going to hear your voice change and think, I'm not alone in this. He paused. That's worth going in there for. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright. She held it. She was good at holding things. Same kind of good, she said quietly, almost to herself. What? She shook her head. Nothing, something Emma said. She picked up her bag. I'll call you when I land. I'll be awake. You have a 6 a.m. client call. I'll still be awake. He looked at her. Go be undeniable. She turned toward the terminal. She walked 3 steps. She turned back. She said, I love you, Daniel. She said it the way she said true things clearly, without hedging, without needing the response before she was willing to say it. She said it, and then she looked at him steadily, the way she looked at things she had decided. He looked at her on that sidewalk at 4:53 in the morning. He said, I love you, Sophia. She nodded once, like data confirmed, like a model that had run correctly. She walked into the terminal. He stood on the sidewalk until she disappeared through the doors. Then he got in his car and drove home through the dark early city, and he was smiling in a way that his face barely contained. She called from the gate. She called when she landed. She texted from the hotel at midnight. Can't sleep. Is that normal? He wrote back. Before something important. Yes. Means you care about getting it right. She responded. Or means I have anxiety. He wrote, both things can be true. She sent the single period. He fell asleep with his phone in his hand. The keynote was at 11 a.m. Eastern. He watched it on his laptop in his home office, having moved his 6 a.m. client call to accommodate the time zone, and not told Sophia he had done that because she would have said not to. Emma had negotiated with her teacher to watch the first 10 minutes on a tablet during quiet reading time, which was a negotiation he had not been informed of in advance, and which he deeply respected. Sophia walked out onto the stage in front of 1,100 people. She looked like herself, not performed, not adjusted, just her. She looked like the woman who had handed him a marker and said, "Show me." Like the woman who had texted, "Don't make it weird," in an elevator, and absolutely meant it, and also didn't. Like the woman who had crouched down to talk to Emma eye to eye, because that was how she believed people deserved to be talked to. She spoke for 41 minutes. The investor part was in the middle. She slowed down. Just like Emma said. Her voice changed, the specific audible change of a person saying the true thing, the one they've been carrying, the one they've been building courage around for years. She said it clearly. She said there were people who told me I was not the right image. She said I went home from those meetings and felt it. All of it. The smallness of it. I felt it, and I got up the next morning, and I built something anyway. Not because I stopped feeling it. Because feeling it and building anyway is what it actually looks like. The room was quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet. He sat at his desk in Chicago and watched 1,100 people stand up, and he pressed his hand flat on the desk, and he breathed. She called him from backstage 20 minutes after she walked off. Her voice was something he had never heard from her before. Something unwound and full and slightly unsteady, in the way of a person who had just put something down that they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten the weight of it. They stood up, she said. I know, I watched. You watched. Moved my 6 a.m. call. A pause. You moved your... She stopped. Daniel. Yeah. You're... She stopped again. He heard her breathe. You're a lot, you know that... You've mentioned it. In the best way. She laughed, the real one, the surprised one. In the absolute best way. He said, you slowed down on the middle part. Emma told me to. Emma's right about most things. She's right about everything. It's slightly alarming. A pause. How did she know? She said it was the part where your voice changed. She said to let them hear it. Sophia was quiet for a moment. He could hear the noise of backstage around her, people movement, the organized chaos of a large event running. Into all of that, she said quietly, she's a remarkable kid. She really is. She has a very good father. She has a lot of people now, he said, looking out for her. He heard Sophia inhale. A small sound, controlled. Yeah, she said softly. She does. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in March, Daniel woke up in Sophia's house. Not in the guest room. Not with a pounding head and wrinkled clothes and a disoriented 4 seconds of wrong ceiling panic. He woke up in the right room, in the familiar light, with the right smell, the specific combination that had become somewhere in the past year, the smell of a place he belonged. He lay still for a moment, the way he had gotten into the habit of doing, taking the morning in before it required anything from him. From downstairs, he could hear the coffee machine which Sophia had finally declared a truce with, after he'd shown her that the settings had been wrong since she'd bought it, a fact she had received with the specific expression of a woman who was annoyed at being wrong and relieved to have an explanation in approximately equal measure. He heard Emma's voice. She was staying the weekend, her overnight bag by the door since Friday, asking something, and Sophia's answer, and Emma's laugh at whatever came back. He sat up. He went downstairs. Sophia was at the counter with 2 mugs, one already poured and waiting, because in a year she had mapped his timing precisely and found it efficient to simply have it ready. Emma was at the table with her cereal and her word puzzle, and the comfortable morning ease of a child who had come to understand this house as a place that held her. Sophia turned when he came in. She looked at him, the way she looked at him now, directly, warmly, without the armor. The way she looked at things she had decided about and no longer needed to reconsider. She held out the mug. She said, "Good morning, honey." He stopped, not in the disoriented "what ceiling is this way" of the first morning. Not in the heart-stopping CEO in the kitchen confusion of October. In the completely specific, entirely deliberate way of a man who understood exactly where he was, and exactly how he had gotten here, and exactly what it meant. He crossed the kitchen. He took the mug. He said, "Still using that line?" She said, "Still working." Emma said without looking up from her puzzle, "It's not a line if you mean it." They both looked at her. She looked up. "What, it's true?" She looked back at her puzzle. "Also, 7 letters, something that means determined. Third letter is S." Sophia said, "Resolute." "That's 8. Steadfast." "That's 8 also." "Persist." 8 again. Daniel said, "Decided." Emma counted on her fingers, looked up. "That works." She filled it in. "Thank you." He looked at Sophia. She looked at him. Between them was the coffee and the kitchen, and the 9-year-old with her word puzzle, and the morning light coming through from the east, and the specific, ordinary, extraordinary weight of a life that had been built from the accumulated choices of 2 people who had both learned the hard way that the careful life was not the same thing as the full one. He had started something in a guest room he didn't remember entering. He had built something in kitchens and boardrooms and stairwells and elevator text messages and whiteboard sessions that ran past 8 p.m. and a concert where a child sang the loud part with total commitment. He had arrived somewhere he had not planned for and had not known to want and could not now imagine being without. Sophia said, "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thinking face. The one Emma says looks like your jaw is working through a math problem." "I don't have a thinking face." "You absolutely have a thinking face," Emma said, still not looking up. "You both have thinking faces. Yours just look different. It's genetic in Dad's case, and occupational in yours." Sophia looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Sophia. Emma filled in another answer. And Daniel Carter, who had once believed that a careful life was a safe life, who had spent 4 years avoiding anything that required more than he was certain he could give, who had walked into a company party on a Thursday night in October with a 2-hour exit strategy and a single beer rule. Put down his mug. Pulled Sophia into a brief, solid, unhurried embrace, the kind that didn't need to be dramatic to mean everything it meant. Pressed his lips to the top of her head, and understood with the complete clarity of a man who had stopped being afraid of real things, that the coffee and the word puzzle, and the morning light, and the woman who had handed him a mug before he asked, and would argue with him until they found the right answer, and had stood on an airport sidewalk and said the true thing without hedging. This was not the life he had protected himself into. This was the life he had finally had the courage to choose, and it was exactly, completely, irreversibly enough.